Hello everyone, Jeanette B. Milio here. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the first week of our class, Entertainment Finance from First Dollar to Profit Distribution. I am very much looking forward to getting to know you over the next 11 weeks, during which we will all do a deep dive into the world of entertainment finance. This first week, we will be covering an industry overview. Industry overview. This module provides a basic overview of the Hollywood entertainment industry with an emphasis on film and television financing and revenue models. By the end of this week, you should be able to differentiate between the studio model and the independent film model. You should be able to identify how recent changes impact the entertainment industry today. And you should be able to identify the important differences regarding the development, financing, production, and distribution as applied by the major studios and the independents. Introduction to the Hollywood industry today. The Hollywood industry undergoes constant changes, and understanding what moves projects forward, being alert yet fair and flexible, is an effective approach to maneuver through these constant changes safely. A producer job description is a problem solver. You'll learn all about this because as you go through the next 11 weeks of this course, you'll hear about some mistakes I made and how I solved them. Understand that the Hollywood business is in fact a business, and every project is a little bit like a startup. So as you go through your projects and are designing them to be ready and included into a pitch deck that an investor would look at and say, this is interesting, I want to give you some money for this, you need to be able to also understand the elements that are needed to be included into this business plan to make this a viable business idea for an investor. During the next 11 weeks, we will talk about all the elements you should be including in a business plan and how you should go about securing your investors. It's okay when you don't have the answer to all the questions that will come up as you do a project, as you talk to investors, and as you are learning more about the industry. But it is important that you look at the various risks that are available, I should say, and are most likely applicable, and that you learn about the ideal way to mitigate those risks and work with them. So knowing everything is not necessary, but knowing what risks you will likely encounter and how you can mitigate a majority of them is essential. And we're going to talk about this over the next few weeks. The history of Hollywood. In 1911, the first studio launched Nestor Studio. And from 1911 to 1929, Hollywood got to enjoy the beautiful black and white silent film era. In the 1920s to the 1960s, we're adding sound and color to the mix, and we're talking about the golden age of Hollywood here, which was dominated by the big five studios: Paramount, RKO, 20th Century Fox, MGM, and Warner Brothers. In 1948, a little wrinkle happened. The Supreme Court decided that studios can no longer own theater chains. Until that point, studios controlled the entire value chain of a film, the development, production, and distribution. With this change, one revenue source was being reduced, and now the studios had to deal with exhibitor owners that now owned the theaters. In the 1950s to the 1960s, we're talking about the golden age of television. This is when the studio started to produce television content. In the 1980s to about 2008, we're talking about a second golden age of television, which is also referred to as the peak TV area, with what I consider some really cool 1980s television series. 2008, Netflix launched, and we all know that that disrupted our industry majorly. And the studios today are another big five, and of course this may change any minute with all the mergers and acquisitions that are going on. But for now, our big five studios are Paramount, Universal, Sony Columbia, Disney, and Warner Brothers. Let's take a look at major studios versus independents. And what's a major studio project? It is a film or television show that is controlled by the studio, which owns the IP. It is a project that is developed, produced, financed, and distributed by the studio. So the studio distributes the film in the theaters, online on their streaming platform, and on video on demand and television. And what's an independent project? That's a film or television show that is controlled by the producer who owns and or controls the IP. It's a project that is developed, produced, financed independently by the producer who would raise the funding from various sources to cover the production costs. The producer would not go ahead and distribute the film into the theaters and on TV and on streamers, but in fact, the producer would manage the distribution rights by engaging a sales agent or a distributor. Major studio finance models include high-budgeted tentpole films based on established IPs. These are IPs that often come with a built-in audience, like an IP based on a comic, DC comic or Marvel, for example, or based on a book like Harry Potter. The major studios finance large scope films, which usually come with large budgets. And of course, the major studio deals with very high distribution costs, for example, for print and advertising campaigns, which are important to announce the release of the film and create a buzz and awareness for the film as it's being released into the theaters. The distribution revenues that are achieved by the studio through their box office and revenues through distribution licenses and merchandising are often used to fund the in-house departments, which I refer to as profit centers. The reason why I say profit centers is because when revenues come in, the studios use that money to pay for services and, for example, equipment or rentals, their stages if the movie was shot on the lot. They pay for services that are provided by their own in-house team. And a large portion of the funding that comes in through distribution revenues is seen to go there. That means for investors, they have to wait until the production costs have been repaid until investors can see a profit. Independent finance models, we should say here first and foremost that when the studios stopped producing these mid-level theatrical features, they created a gap for independent producers to fill, which then went ahead and still do finance films that are low to mid-level and that are theatrically released. Not all of them, but some of them. And this is the niche that was left open by the studios who no longer produce these mid-level theatrical films. Independent producers have to deal with feasible budgets. They have to make sure that films are not too expensive, because otherwise they're going to have a very hard time raising the financing for them. And of course, independent producers deal with much lower distribution costs because they are not the ones who actually generate a marketing campaign and pay for a marketing campaign, for example. That is usually done by the distributor who acquires the rights to distribute the film that the producer has independently realized. Let's take a closer look at the major studio finance model versus the independent finance model. We did mention just a minute ago that major studios control the IP production and distribution. They also control the revenue flow. We also talked about distribution. We talked about the fact that the major studios control the distribution of their content in the theaters, on VOD, online, and on TV. I did mention that some of the revenues that are deriving from distribution and merchandising are used to cover production costs which are generated by certain departments the studio controls, meaning in-house departments. That's what I mean when I say studios earn money by spending money. Every time they produce a movie, they get to charge production fees and studio fees and lot fees and equipment fees. Every time they release a film, they get to charge distribution fees. Studios do not use completion bonds, which cover production budget overages, amongst some other things. And of course, major studios are subject to box office risks. The independent producer must run a cost-efficient production, must apply a feasible budget in order to meet the market demand and in order to finance a film that the market can bear. Independent producers do control the IP and they license distribution rights. They're not the ones to go out there to actually distribute their film in theaters, on VOD, online, or TV. That is done by the distributor who acquired the distribution rights for the film that the producer produced. The independent producer can actually avoid box office risk by doing that, because the box office risk is taken over by the distributor who bought and licensed the distribution rights for the film the producer produced. Professional producers do use completion bonds and are therefore insured against any production budget overages. And professional producers also control the revenue flow and can provide transparent accounting. Mini major studios. Some mini major studios are actually specialty divisions of major studios. They were launched in order to produce the mid-level theatrical features the major studio no longer produces. So mini majors produce and distribute low to mid-level theatrical features. They fill a niche that the majors have left. They often look for film projects with Academy Award potential, and they partner with independent producers who deliver commercially viable films that meet their demand. The Hollywood industry today, what are we observing? The major studios have been driving the industry until they were disrupted by the streamers, namely Netflix, who started it all. Hollywood major studios focus on IP-driven tentpoles with a built-in audience. They did launch recently their own online platforms with exclusive content that is owned and controlled by the studios, and they withdrew some of that content from other platforms which were licensing it. The independents were filling a gap that was left open by the majors when they stopped producing mid-level theatrical feature films. The independents are facing a decreased price level for commissions and license fees, and they're facing a decreased buying power today. They face also changing content mandates, which are driven by the various mergers that have happened recently and driven by the fact that a lot of people were let go and new personnel was added in a lot of the places with streamers, studios, and networks. The independents see an opportunity and can respond to the increased content demand, but they must step up with a strong, really innovative content, and they must apply feasible budgets. The streamers drive the audience online. They have made it a point to contract A-level talent exclusively, and they are creating their own in-house talent pool by also creating their own cast. They are no longer, they are still hiring A-level talent, but they are creating their own kind of A-level talent in order to avoid paying these high fees to expensive A-level cast and showrunners. So they're creating their own. They create bingeable content and create content that is specifically designed for their respective audience. The networks have lost audience to the streamers, and the decreased ad revenues that are connected to the loss of audience is the reason why The independents are facing decreased price levels for commissions and license fees and are facing decreased buying power today. The decreased funds for acquisitions and commissions are creating a lot of pressure for the networks to create and be part of what they call a content war by creating their own content in-house and producing expensive TV shows, hiring A-level talent, and hiring A-level writer-directors to create their own content. This is the way, meaning the content war, is the way the networks are competing with the streamers. And of course, the networks also launch their own online platforms and place their own content there in order to compete with the independent streamers.
This week's key activity includes quiz 1, which needs to be submitted by Sunday. And there may be additional key activities due for this week, such as discussion posts, maybe an assignment. So you can check on that on your Canvas calendar because it will be announced there, as well as in an announcement that you might have received via email. So always check and see if there's any additional key activity due this week. And if it is, it would also be due by Sunday. Enjoy your first week.
This was the summary for our week 1 industry overview. If you have any questions regarding this or the course material or the quiz or the assignments or the discussions, please feel free to reach out to me via the Canvas inbox. You can also set a time for office hours, which are announced on the Canvas calendar as well. You can sign up there for an office hour slot, which is done through a one-on-one live Zoom meeting. I'm looking forward to meeting you, and you'll get the next summary for the next week next week.